a first felony offender. You were sentenced January 7, 1994 to life in St. Tammany Parish for a second-degree murder conviction. Is that information correct, Mr. Brand?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Palmentier?
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chairman. May it please the board this morning, Lori Palmentier here representing Mr. Harold Brand, also known as Bubba, who is also present on Zoom this morning as well. Mr. Brand was arrested on December the 28th of 1991 for the killing of Miss Shirley Laris. There's no question that this was a tragic and heinous crime. Immediately after police detained Mr. Brand for what they thought was a DWI, Mr. Brand told police that her body was in the trunk of the car. 45 minutes after his arrest, Mr. Brand gave a full confession about what he had done. And on January 22nd, 1992, Mr. Brand was indicted for first-degree murder. On January 7th, 1994, after being offered a plea to second-degree murder, he accepted this plea and was sentenced to life without benefit. Since his arrest, Mr. Brand has served over 30 years in prison. And I'd like to tell you what Mr. Brand has done during the last 30 years. And I'll start with what he hasn't done. Mr. Brand has had absolutely zero disciplinary write-ups in the last 17 years of his confinement. In the first 10 years of his incarceration, he received only 19 write-ups, 9 of which occurred in the very first year of his placement at the Department of Corrections. This disciplinary record is a strong indicator of his potential, if permitted reentry by this board. His record was so good that for the last 12 years of his incarceration, he was transferred from Angola to the Louisiana State Police Barracks, a minimum security facility where he built on his exemplary record. In fact, for the last 6 years, he worked full-time at the governor's mansion. As Governor John Bell Edwards wrote in his letter, which was submitted by Mr. Brand with his application, quote, "It is my pleasure to inform you of my appreciation of Harold's exceptional service during his tenure here in the Louisiana Governor's Mansion," end quote. Prior to Mr. Brand's incarceration, he was a completely different person. He had dropped out of school in the 8th grade, was drinking alcohol all the time, using all kinds of drugs, which led him to a very dark existence at the age of 19. Once he was sent to DOC, he studied and took the necessary classes to obtain his GED, which he received in 1996. In 1997, he enrolled through the online Lavelle College of New Orleans Baptist Theology Seminary and received both an associate and bachelor's of arts degree in Christian ministry on May 17th of 2002. And based on his calling to minister others, and after succeeding and obtaining his degrees, he then proceeded to actively serve as a cell block minister, those inmates placed on extended lockdown. He conducted daily meetings, providing spiritual guidance and support for those in crisis or looking for advice. He facilitated Bible studies in Camp C. He presided over funerals, and he even delivered death messages to those inmates concerning their families on the outside and provided them with comfort as well. Mr. Brand has shown a consistent pattern of responsibility in several jobs over the course of his 30 years of confinement. Specifically, some of those jobs have included working at the governor's mansion in laundry and in landscaping, working at the Louisiana State Police headquarters, helping maintain their fleet and their parts department, as well as working in their mailroom, and working as a dorm orderly and Class A trustee. His work supervisor, his security supervisor, and classification officer all agree about his exemplary record, the trust he has earned, and his work ethic. Mr. Brand has completed a number of behavioral modification programs, including chemical dependency treatment in 1997, sober group AA 12-step class in 1999, Dale Carnegie 1912 public speaking course in 1999, Christian Formation Foundations for Ministry Part 1 course by the Diocese of Baton Rouge, Intermediate Catechist Certificate by the Diocese of Baton Rouge for the Foundation of Ministry Part 2, a Certificate of American Program for Responsibility of Self-Determination Program, Intermediate Catechist Certificate by the Diocese of Baton Rouge for the Foundation of Ministry Part 3, Anger Management at Angola, Outstanding Volunteer Facilitator Certificate for Ministry and Theology 1 course from the Diocese of Baton Rouge, Certificate for Living in Balance, Moving from a Life of Addiction to Life of Recovery, Part 1 at Angola, Certificate for Release Preparation Training, 100 hours program, a certificate for the Celebrate Recovery Steps study. Mr. Brand's transformation has allowed him to be prepared to be a productive member of our society if permitted reentry by this board. He has a solid transition plan for reentry. He has several job opportunities waiting for him, as reflected by the employment agreements that numerous people have signed and submitted on his behalf as part of his application. He's been selected by the Parole Project for their program. They will provide housing and mentorship to him immediately upon his release. Meanwhile, he intends to apply through Interstate Compact to have his parole supervision transferred to Mississippi, where his fiancee and grandbabies reside. Mr. Brand has a tremendous amount of support from his family and church family, who some are here to speak today. And when the board is ready, we would like to hear from them as well. And I'll reserve a brief closing, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Palmentier. All right, Ms. Jackson, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Brand.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Ms. Palmentier has done an outstanding job in listing all of the good things that you've accomplished during your time of incarceration. And your record and your activities are quite commendable. They really are. But this is a hard case, Mr. Brand, because of the circumstances of this offense. It's a really, really difficult case for myself, and I'm sure for the other members of the board. So what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about the situation, your life around the time of this incident, and just some other questions about your participation in this crime.
Yes, ma'am.
You were 19 years of age when the crime was committed, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And the victim was Shirley Laris. And you knew Miss Laris, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
How did you know her?
Two mutual friends, and we know each other by a year.
And what was the nature of your relationship with her?
We was friends, and we used to hang out. It was a
Would you use the term friends with benefits?
yes, ma'am.
So you knew her.
Yes, ma'am.
And the other gentleman, tell me about him. How did you know him? What was your relationship with him?
My co-defendant, Christopher Picard.
Yes.
I think I've known him for a couple of years. We met through other friends.
And how did the two of you come to be with Miss Laris on the date of this incident?
We had all met up and we was gonna go out drinking. We was gonna hang out, go drinking. And
Okay.
I think I met up with them, and I wound up dropping my car off at my house, and we rode with Shirley. And the plan was just,
How old was she?
she was 17.
Okay. And what was the plan?
To just go out and drink, just hang out.
All right. And then what happened?
we had been drinking, and she was killed, and I'm responsible for her death.
No. That's a big jump.
Yes,
That's a
ma'am.
big jump.
I know that her and I had went in the room to have sex, and my co-defendant came in the room, and I asked him to leave, and he had left out the room. And when I left out the room, a few minutes later, Shirley had left out and went and got her.
Let me stop you right there. There was an indication in the record that was it Picard?
Yes, ma'am.
Was invited by you to have sex with Miss Laris.
I don't ever remember inviting them. There's a lot of things I don't remember that night, but I know I'm responsible for her death.
Well, we're going to talk about some of those
Yes,
things.
ma'am.
At some point, she went and locked herself in the bathroom. You remember that?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
I know when I asked him to leave the room, she went into the bathroom, and that's when he left out the room, and I followed him out the room.
She ended up in her vehicle, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And she locked the doors, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Why do you suppose she did that?
Out of fear.
And why didn't you all just let her go home?
I couldn't even answer that question.
And in fact, Mr. Picard took a concrete paver and broke out her window, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And what did you do after he broke out the window?
I stabbed her.
Why?
There's no answer to the why. There's no acceptable answer why I did what I did. I know that I stabbed her. I remember stabbing her.
Okay. And at one point after that, she was dragged out of the car?
Yes, ma'am. And that's a lot of stuff I don't remember after that. I know that I stabbed her, and I read over the reports to my attorney and saying I struck her in the head with a brick. I'm not denying anything I did. I know it was a horrible death. I know it was horrible, and I take total responsibility for my actions that night. But I don't remember everything that took place that night. But I know that I stabbed her, and the report said I struck her in the head with a brick.
What I struggle with,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Brandt, not just the horrible nature of the crime and how really afraid that little girl was, but you knew her.
Yes, ma'am.
You knew her. She wasn't a stranger. She was someone that you knew. So my question to you is, what is it in you that would allow you to kill in such a vicious fashion someone that you know?
I think at the age of 19, I had no regard for others. I was selfish. I was inconsiderate. I had no direction in life, no purpose.
But what concerns me again, we see horrible crimes all the time.
Yes, ma'am.
But again, for someone to do this to someone that they knew, considered a friend, indicates to me that there's something in that person that goes beyond being young, being under the influence of drugs or alcohol. I mean, that's pretty, that's a pretty terrifying thought that someone that you know could do this to you. There was a comment made, and I think it was in your interview with the police, that you and Mr. Picard had discussed killing someone to find out what that would be like.
I read a report that my attorney had brought to me, and I don't remember saying any of it, but it's documented, so I know I said it, but I don't remember saying it.
Well, but it's convenient, Mr. Brand, not to remember, and I know that, you know, the mind has a way of sometimes blocking out things, but it's really convenient for you not to remember the things that are most troubling to us as a board when we're trying to make this decision.
Yes, ma'am. I don't remember it. I read it and I said it. I just don't remember saying it.
Well, let
You
me
know, I
ask
feel
you
horrible.
this. Do you remember whether you remember saying it or not? Do you remember discussing with Mr. Picard what it might feel like or be like to kill someone?
I don't remember. I remember us always watching like the mafia movies and everything like that, but we never said we just wanted to go out and kill somebody.
Have you ever had a mental health evaluation while you were in prison?
Not that I recall.
Do
No,
you
ma'am.
do you think you have any psychological issues that might need to be addressed?
No, ma'am.
Why not?
Because I've taken other programs, my Christian faith. I know that, you know, through the 12 steps, realizing and admitting that I was powerless over alcohol and the drugs, that my life had become unmanageable. And also understand that I need a power greater than myself to restore myself to sanity. And giving my will over to God and my life. I feel horrible what happened. I'm ashamed of it. I'm sickened by it. I know the pain and the harm that I caused the Lara's family for my actions, my choices that made that night, but I'm not the 19-year-old that committed that horrible crime. I'm a different individual.
Let me ask you something else, because I understand that we aren't the same at 19 as we are at whatever age you are now. But as part of your application process, you referred to yourself back then as a 19-year-old knucklehead. Remember that?
Yes, ma'am. I was just stupid.
I struggle with applying the term knucklehead to someone who commits a vicious, horrific murder. A knucklehead is someone who attempts to avoid a DWI checkpoint and runs off the road and gets in an accident. That's a knucklehead. But to describe someone who viciously murders someone that they know as a knucklehead makes me question the depth of your remorse and your understanding of the magnitude of what happened in this case. So what would you say about that?
I meant that I was irresponsible, that I was selfish, that I was inconsiderate, I had no regard for others. There's no words that describe the remorse that's within my heart. I know the hurt that I caused. I know the life that was taken, and I'm responsible for it. I know the hurt I caused Shirley's family. And I've worked toward bettering myself by all the choices I've continued to make for the last 25 years. For the programs I've taken, educational programs, the rehabilitation programs, knowing that that was not who I am. That's not the individual that I am.
Well, what would you say to Shirley's mom or her family or any of the people who are still suffering because of having lost her?
I'm truly sorry for what happened that night. I'm ashamed of it. I prayed for them through the years, asking God to bring healing into their hearts for the damage and the hurt and the pain that I've caused by my actions over 30 years ago. I'm truly sorry for the depths of my heart. I know I can't undo what was done. And there's no words to express the remorse that's within my heart. I'm truly sorry for what happened.
And Mr. Brand, you know, we look at all the good things that you've done, and you've done a lot. And I don't dispute that in any way or diminish that in any way. You've done a lot. But do you think that there are sometimes things that are so bad that no amount of good works can overcome just the horrific nature of what has occurred?
I know there's nothing I can do to atone for my actions and my choices I made when Shirley's life was taken 30 years ago. For the hurt I caused.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think it would cause hurt to her family for you to be released early?
I don't think no amount of time I can serve would ever take that hurt away.
But do you think their hurt would be compounded if you were released early?
Yes, ma'am.
Because that's something we also have to take into consideration
Yes, ma'am.
in making this decision. And it's a tough decision.
Yes, ma'am. But I know I'm not the individual that committed that crime 30 years ago. The choices I've made to become a better individual, going to the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, enrolling there and graduating, all the professors made investments in my life.
Well, what's been the most important thing that you've learned through your theological studies?
It's to help others, to encourage others. God's grace, God's mercy, God's forgiveness, becoming the man that God's called me to be, a man of integrity, a man of character. In the ministry, I work with men in extended lockdown, death row, working cell blocks, just reaching them where they was at, ministering to them, talking with them, praying with them, letting them know that their lives had meaning.
Well, have you considered the fact that you may be exactly where God has called you to be and placed you to serve?
Yes, ma'am, I have served God in incarceration. God has brought me through all these years with the calling He has on my life. And I feel like if I'm given a second chance, that I can continue that in ministry out there, working with troubled teens. And
But what about ministry to the guys who are still inside, who still
Yes,
need that?
I'm gonna be coming back and ministering to them. I'm gonna be working with other families of incarcerated loved ones.
Well, again, I really want to commend you for everything you've done. I do.
And I've done everything I've done because I realize and I understand the pain that I caused 30 years ago. I know what I've done. I know the hurt I caused.
All right.
And I'm truly sorry for that. Okay. The remorse in my heart is immeasurable. It's internal. That's why I have a heart to help others. That's not who I am. I don't want to cause hurt in people's lives. I want to bring encouragement. I want to bring help. I want to add to their lives, not take away from it.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Brand, for our discussion. And that's all I have. And Ms. Renata, well, let me ask this. Is there anyone at the institution in the room with Mr. Brand who would like to add something?
Yes, ma'am.
Make a statement about him?
Yes, Ms. Jackson. My name is Riss Swear, classification here at State Police Barracks. As has already been stated on the record, Harold has been with us approximately 12 years. He's been on several different jobs, but the most recent assignment is one that requires a high level of trust and responsibility. And he's received very good work record reports from the supervisors there, as well as the other jobs he's had here. He's a leader among our population, and we think he's an excellent candidate.
Thank you. Ms. Renata.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Jackson. I'd like to ask staff if they would. We have lots of folks who are here with us today who've indicated they'd like to speak, so I'll ask staff to introduce them, please.
Okay, let me go over the list real quick. First, we have Andrew Hunley, Louisiana Parole Project here in support. He'll be speaking. Harold Brand Sr., the father, also here in support, will be speaking. Patricia Lane Seaman, girlfriend, who is here in support and will be speaking. Terry LaBelle, support, friend and pastor, will be speaking. We have in opposition the victim's mother, Miss Shirley Adams, also she will be speaking. In opposition, we also have the victim's friend, Miss Rachel Pickering, will be speaking, and the Assistant District Attorney from St. Tammany, Matthew Kaplan, will be making a statement as well. We'll start with Andrew Hunley. Andrew, go ahead and speak now.
Andrew Hunley with Louisiana Parole Project, appearing before the board today to inform you that if Harold Brand is granted an opportunity for a second chance and is released, he will be a Parole Project client. Oftentimes we will, at the pardon board, we will send letters on behalf of clients and informing the board of that decision. However, periodically we will appear in person to make sure that the board understands the depth of support that we have for our client. I'll keep my comments brief because I know there are many speakers here today, but it is Parole Project's sincerest position that we feel like Harold Brand is an excellent candidate for commutation based on the change that he's made in his life over the last 3 decades. We certainly do not condone the actions that brought him to prison. However, we recognize that he has been a leader in the population at both Louisiana State Penitentiary and at the State Police Barracks, and that he has prepared himself for release and to do great things if he's given that opportunity. Our organization commits to stand by him throughout his release to provide reentry support and all the services that come with our program if he's given that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Next, we'll hear from the father, Mr. Harold Brand Sr. Mr. Brand, can you unmute your mic, please, and make your statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay, my name is Harold Brand Sr., and I'm speaking in support of my son, Bo. 30 years ago, my son was involved in a tragedy with Shirley Laris, where she lost her life. And there's not a day that goes by that Bubba doesn't think about regret what happened that night. Bubba told me that he had a chance to do good, but was too drunk to do it. Bubba was a troubled young man in his later teen years, dealt with alcohol and drug abuse. But over the last 30 years, I've seen Bubba grow from that man to a new man. His faith in God has given him strength, desire to do better. I've heard it said that everyone that goes to jail finds Jesus. And I believe that that is somewhat true. But it takes a special relationship and commitment to still be walking with Jesus 30 years later. Bubba was an inmate minister at Angola for 11 years. When Bubba gets out, he becomes truly free. He wants to continue that ministry, working with troubled teens and young adults that may be struggling and headed down the same path that Bubba walked. It's a path leading to heartache and destruction. And I believe my son and Shirley have a story to share. But I believe out of this tragedy, God can work good and bring hope to other lives. Me and my wife, we know what it is to lose a child. We lost 2 children 8 years ago. And we know that the Laris family will never get over. But we pray that God will help them through it, give them strength and comfort that only He can. The penal institution, in my recollection, was designed for restitution, rehabilitation. And by looking at Bubba's accomplishments and actions, you can truly see his rehabilitation. But my son is real. His faith is real. And his love for God and his family is very real. I know that we all have a past, things that we're not proud of, things that only God and you know, things that you had to ask for forgiveness. And that's why I'm here today, to ask for forgiveness and a second chance for my son, whom I'm very, very proud of the man that he's become. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Brand. Next, we'll hear from girlfriend Patricia Lane Seaman.
Good afternoon. Tricia Seaman in support of Harold Brand. I've known the Brand family for about 40 years, since Bubba was a little boy. I remember him to be a very quiet, shy kind of kid. He didn't have much self-confidence or self-esteem. He was always a follower, never a leader, and he didn't make friends very easy, even as a kid. He was different. He was the only kid who wore hearing aids, and he has a speech impediment that required him to attend speech therapy, which didn't make him real popular. Looking back, I think it's pretty clear for me to see that Bubba's abuse of alcohol, even from a very early age, was a result of his low self-esteem and lack of confidence. I think that he used alcohol as his liquid courage, and unfortunately for him, it led him down some pretty dark paths. It's really only been the last 20, maybe 21, 22 years that his changed to that of a man who's not only strong in his relationship with Christ, but is confident in himself and is a leader of many. Over the years, long after Bubba went to prison, I married and raised my family, but I maintained a relationship with the Brand family and him. We talked on the phone, we wrote letters, and I visited him. And every visit revealed an ever-changing man. He was a man of God, and I admired him. I'm not sure when, but it was sometime after my late husband passed that I found myself in love with Bubba. Eventually, he fell in love with me. Granted, we're no spring chickens, but we've dreamed of the possibility of Bubba given a second chance at life, that we would get married, he would live on my farm with me in Mississippi, and he would help me raise the 3 grandbabies that live with me. And I know, and so does he, it's just a dream, but we hope someday it would be a dream that comes true for us. I began bringing my grandkids to visit him pretty regularly, almost weekly, earlier this year. And my oldest granddaughter had an issue, typical teenage issue, nothing big, that he helped her work through. And I was really, my heart was touched by the fact that he could do such a thing for a young girl. If I had any doubt whatsoever what my future would hold with him, it was erased at that moment. I believe he is the man that I want to spend my final years with, the man that I want to share raising grandbabies with. He's my final chapter. So today I humbly ask that you look beyond the man from 30 years ago and see the man sitting before you today, who's not only grown immeasurably, but if given a second chance at life, he would spend the rest of it helping others, if you can find it in your heart to grant him clemency. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Seaman. Next, we'll hear from friend and pastor Terry Lobel.
Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak briefly on the behalf of Harold Bubba Brand. While I only recently became acquainted with Bubba, I must admit that I was impressed by his attitude, by his character, by his commitment, and the achievements that he made during this time. I'm amazed at his dedication to positive change through different programs, with continuing his education while becoming a leader and a servant unto others. Bubba's heart and accomplishments have prompted me to become involved by volunteering my time to serve as a mentor, if needed, to Bubba. While he continues to work with others in his present situation, I'm excited about the possibilities of having Bubba involved in one or more of the faith-based programs that I am presently working with, such as, to just name a few, Teen Challenge, Louisiana Youth Program, Interfaith Prison Ministries, BACA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, Night of Angels, Falling Riders Foundation, Little Angels, Up Man Men Ministries, AA, Reach, and helping veterans through the AMVET and American Legion organizations. There are 3 areas where I feel Bubba could make a huge impact in the future. Number 1, at-risk teenagers, encouraging them to have the right attitude, helping them overcome their addictions, and modifying their behavior. Number 2, those that are struggling with the right choices, both before and after being released from a facility or rehab program. Number 3, working with the families who have a family member incarcerated and helping them to cope daily with their everyday life. In closing, I understand that Bubba's past and the decisions that he made can never be undone or erased. But I also believe they could be used to prevent others from following this exact pathway, while making a huge difference in the lives of those that he can reach if provided that opportunity. And so thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Lavelle. Next, we're going to go to Matthew Kaplan, the 22nd JDC, is Assistant District Attorney.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to appear by Zoom. I've just some short comments. What I was going to say, Ms. Jackson really hit on the head, which is that, it does not seem like Mr. Brand is experiencing a terrible amount of suffering, given that he's been in a minimum security facility for 12 years, including 6 years at the governor's mansion. But Shirley Laris's parents continue to suffer. Ms. Adams wrote a letter to the parole board indicating that she continues to have nightmares involving Mr. Brand. And so they are experiencing very much suffering. And to allow him to walk out of prison would increase, it would just cause more suffering in the world. That's the bottom line. The other things are, this is a 17-year-old who died because Harold Brand wanted to know what it felt like to kill somebody. And I commend his 0 write-ups in 17 years as very impressive, as well as all of the developments the education he has attained, and his ministering to prisoners. It's all very commendable. But all I ask, it's one thing to have to bury your child. It's another thing to have to watch the man who killed your child walk out of prison. And I would ask that if the board is inclined to grant clemency, at least wait until Shirley's parents have passed away. Not that I hope that happens anytime soon, but the only way to do this without dramatically increasing the amount of suffering in the world is to wait until such suffering will not occur. And thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Okay, next we're going to hear from the victim's mother, Miss Shirley Adams. You can just speak, Miss Shirley. They should be able to hear you. You're unmuted. You can go ahead and talk.
To say that won't bring her hurt back.
If she's still having some connection problems, let's go to Miss Rachel Pickering, the victim's friend, and we'll come back to Miss Shirley.
Hi. I was friends with Shirley since she was 11 years old. So when you all are reading a name on a piece of paper and you're discussing somebody, I get it. It's what you do for a daily, but this was my friend. This was my best friend. And it's not changed anything. And to Harold, I am glad that you've done good things. I really am, because I believe that, you know, part of being remorseful is taking responsibility for yourself and for the things that you did. But when you discuss, you know, how you were 30 years ago, we'll never know how she was. We'll never know what she could have been. We'll never know all the good things that she could have done. She'll never get to raise her grandkids that you speak of, Patricia. She'll never get to spend Christmases or family gatherings. She'll never have that. I walk to a grave and I look at a picture in a piece of glass, and that is what is left of her. That is it. There's nothing else. And to sit and think for 1 second, do I believe that people deserve second chances? Of course I do. Of course I do. But to say that you commit a crime and that you wanted to see what it felt like was to kill somebody, you also should have to feel like what the consequences look like when you take that into your own hands and you stab and brutally beat a girl to death. Lock her in the back of a trunk and proceed off to dump her body. I cannot imagine that that's someone I'd ever want to work, I'm going to be honest with you, with any part of society, let alone children, let alone teenagers. You know, I think from the point that he made that decision, he and Christopher, to kill her, I think moving forward, anything that you should do is between you and God. I don't, all of the things that have happened, they're not good impressions. They just aren't. A good impression would have been, just as you said, Miss Jackson, why didn't you let her go home? Why wasn't it enough for you to take advantage of her body? Why did you have to kill her? Why? And that's never going to be answered. And as much as I do believe that, yes, what you said earlier, Matthew, that if releasing him after a point that his parents, you know, Shirley's parents are gone, well, it's Shirley's mom at this point. Shirley's dad was murdered. He was murdered and he was chopped up and he was left found in a dumpster. So you have to understand that this is compounding so much. And even though it has nothing really to do with this family has suffered greatly. Shirley dated a family member of mine. And that's how I became close with her. But you all don't get to see the calendar that she marked on, that she said, hey, I'll be 18 in this such and such amount of days. She was going to turn 18 January 7th. They murdered her on December 28th. She barely graduated high school. She did not get the opportunity that you all are asking for him. I get it. He's your family. And look, my heart hurts for you that something would happen that would take your son away from you. Mr. Harold, to take your son away from you.
Miss Pickering, we need you to please conclude for us. Thank you.
My conclusion is that I don't believe that Harold Brand or Christopher Picard at any point should ever be released from prison. I think that is the very least that we could do as a society, is at least keep, you know, true to the word that they were incarcerated for their life, for taking her life.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Pickering. We're going to hear from the mother, Ms. Shirley Adams. I believe they have her on the phone in there. Is that correct, John?
Hello, my name's Shirley Adams. I'm little Shirley's mother. And I want to say, I do not want him out of jail. I do not want him to have any kind of pride. I want him to stay where he's at because he deserves to. He doesn't need to walk the earth because he'll get out and do the same thing he's done to my daughter. And believe me, I go through it every freaking year. Every year I go through this. And for him to have the gall to sit there and say he's sorry, you ain't sorry, you son of a bitch. You ain't sorry. You know good. And I
All right,
wish
we're going to move
ready.
on. We're going to move
Stay
on. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't tolerate that kind of talk. We understand your position. We understand you're opposed, and we understand you're hurt. But we're going to move on now. Mr. Brand, is there a statement you'd like to make before we turn it over to Ms. Palmentier?
Yes, ma'am. I know
And
there's
address your remarks to us, the board,
Yes,
okay?
ma'am. I know there's nothing I can do to atone for my actions 30 years ago. I'm not the 19-year-old who committed that horrible crime. I've taken advantage of every opportunity that's been offered and given to me to become a better person. I'm truly sorry for what happened. I'm ashamed of it. I'm sickened by it. If I could undo it, I would. But every choice I made for the last 25 years has become a better person to help others. And if I'm given an opportunity to receive a second chance, I'm going to continue doing that once I'm released. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Palmentier?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I have met with Bubba now multiple times at the State Police Barracks, where he's been housed for the last dozen years. I've reviewed the record from his court proceedings, including his taped confession, which he gave some 45 minutes after being arrested. And Judge Jackson, I would like to address a couple of the issues that you had brought to our attention as far as any mental health treatment that Mr. Brand has received. I do know from reviewing the record that at one point a sanity commission was appointed, and there was 3 doctors that gave their reports for Mr. Brand, and he was determined competent to proceed. As far as mental health, other than the programs that he's taken, I do know of that. As far as his remark during his confession, 45 minutes after he was arrested, of him being a knucklehead, I know that Mr. Brand would describe himself and his actions that night as having been those of a monster. I've talked with him. I know how he feels about it. And I know that he is not a monster, and that he was acting out of drugs and alcohol. And I know that he prays for the Laris family. He prays that they will find forgiveness in their hearts. And there's nothing that he can do to change the fact or whether they're opposed to his parole eligibility. He can't change that. But what he can change, and no number of certificates, degrees, or amount of time that he actively reformed his life will ever take away or diminish the loss suffered by her family. And I know he's truly sorry. I know it. And based on what he has accomplished in the last 30 years, he's not the same person that's in that statement he gave on December 28th of 1991 when he was 19 years old and killed Shirley. The record reflects that he's actively committed himself to this transformation by completing every program available to him and mentoring and serving others in those same programs. Bubba's case is not one that the board sees all the time, where someone applies for commutation and then suddenly finds Jesus. This is a very unusual case where the board has a complete record that shows a consistent pattern over the last 30 years of a life transformed. His youth and horrible choices during the first 20 years of his life culminated in the tragic death in this case. We hope the board will consider his last 30 years of more than atonement, but genuine remorse as expressed through his actions and commitment to change. We're respectfully asking this honorable board to grant his request for clemency and commute his life sentence to a determinate number of years with immediate parole eligibility. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is the panel prepared to vote? The board?
May I move for executive session?
We have a motion for executive session by Ms. Jackson. Is there a second?
I'll second it. I'll
Second
second
by
it.
Mr.
Second.
Marabella. Could we do the roll call, please?
Okay, Ms. Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Marabella,
Yes.
Ms. Renata,
Yes.
Mr. Roche,
Yes.
Mr. Wise.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Brand, we'll be in executive session for a few moments to discuss confidential matters. Stand by, everyone. We'll be right back.
Okay, so what we're going to do for this hearing is after this one is complete, we're going to unpack it, and then we're going to jump into his co-defendant who he's speaking about, who had a commutation hearing a year later. We had already done his commutation hearing about 7 months ago, but I thought it would be intriguing to listen to it back to back to hear the two different sides. One thing I did catch is that I'm pretty sure his attorney, in her final statement, used the words that he had described himself as a knucklehead in his statement to the police. And that's not what Ms. Jackson was talking about. He had described himself as a knucklehead in his application for commutation. This wasn't something he had said when he was 18 years old to the police officers. What he told to the police officers was he wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. And then all these years later, 30 years later, he puts in the application, I did it because I was a knucklehead. That was, so anyways, that was just something I thought I had caught there. But it's actually been a long break. It's going on 10 minutes now. I just fast forwarded for you, 10-minute break, which is, I feel like I've said this several times, but it might be the longest one that I'm aware of. Maybe they're having a lunch break, but I doubt it. I think that they're actually debating quite seriously what's going on. It can't be easy.
All right, I think everybody is back in the room, so we'll be back in regular session, and the board is prepared to vote. We are going to start with Ms. Jackson.
Mr. Brand, looking at your record, it's been exemplary. You've done a lot. You have an excellent prison record. Your last write-up was in 2004, and there are a lot of people who support and believe in you. But I have to look at the whole picture. And while I think that there might be a point in the future where I could vote for a commutation, I'm not there today. I'm not there today. I take into consideration the opposition, but I also take into consideration the pain that's going to be inflicted on Miss Laris's mom as a result of a decision to release you early. You're still a young man, and you'll still have other opportunities in the future for reconsideration. And you know, Paul said he learned the secret of contentment. You know, you're in a place where you can do an immeasurable amount of good to men who are hopeless, who have no peace, who have no right perspective. And you're at a place that you can minister to those people in a way that you can't do from the outside. And you're in a place where you're greatly needed. So today my vote is going to be to deny your commutation. I want to encourage you to continue the work that you're doing because it's important. And when you're eligible to apply again, I'm going to encourage you to do that. But today my vote is to deny.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Mr. Wise?
You know, at this time, I see a lot of people here, and I respect that. I've seen Mr. Matthew at a lot of our hearings here today. But today, I'm going to be a little different. You've done some positive things since you've been incarcerated. Mr. Swear, I know he wouldn't be at state police barracks if he wasn't capable of doing what y'all had. Today, my vote is going to be to grant his parole after commutation of 99 years with parole eligibility after 35 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wise. Mr. Roche?
Mr. Bryan, good afternoon. Mr. Bryan?
Is on mute.
Okay. Mr. Bryan, I cannot, in good conscience, due to the amount of opposition from the victim's family, the opposition from law enforcement, the opposition from the 22nd JDC District Attorney's Office, and I have to bring in the nature of the crime. I cannot, in good conscience, make a recommendation to the governor, so therefore, I'm going to deny your request today.
Thank you, Mr. Roche. Mr. Marabella? You're on mute, Mr. Marabella.
Okay, I hit the wrong button and it lost
Yeah.
the screen. Thank you, Madam Chairman. First off, I'd like to say to the family and the friends who are here today of Ms. Laris, I can't imagine the grief and the pain that you've suffered. If my vote would relieve that pain and would bring back your daughter, I would do that in a second. But that's impossible, and we all know that. Our job today is to look at the horrible facts, and there's no question those facts are horrible. But it's also our responsibility and my responsibility to look at what Mr. Brand has accomplished. And there can be no question that he has accomplished a lot of things while he's been in prison for the last 30 years. And he's a low risk. He's had no write-up since 2004. My vote, likewise, would be as Mr. Wise has stated. I would commute his sentence to 99 and make him parole eligible after he serves 35 years. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Marabella. Well, Mr. Brand, you've received a split vote. You received 2 votes that were favorable to your request and 2 votes to deny. So the outcome of today's proceeding is that your application's been denied. You have been encouraged to reapply when you're eligible to do so. So I would echo that encouragement. Good luck to you, sir. Mr. Swear, thanks for accommodating us today.
Yes,
That
ma'am.
concludes
Thank you.
our business. It's 1:10. We will adjourn. Thanks everyone who participated today.
Thank y'all.
Okay, so I think what we're gonna do here,
Mr.
now he was
Childs.
denied, which I personally think was the right move. Frankly, I mean, he took, like, there was no accountability. I didn't see it. He literally went throughout the hearing stating, I don't remember. You don't feel remorse for someone who went through the, remember, the idea was that, and thank you, Richard. You found an old newspaper, so I can't show it on the screen, but it's an old newspaper written in 1991 December 29th, and it basically just it gives a rundown where they say that it was a police officer saw this car blow through a stop sign late Saturday night, and remember, this is December 29th. Wow, it's like right after. So he chases them down. They run away from him. They smash into a tree, and then when he gets to them, they find out that there's a girl in their trunk. And that's when they confess, and they say that that she didn't want to have sex with his co-defendant who were about to watch. So they decided to take her life. And they did it in the most brutal way. In this next hearing, they do get into more of the details of the crime. I think what I'm going to do is play the second hearing and then do a full unpacking of both. So with that, let's jump in. As you can see, it has had quite a lot of views, 22,000 8 months ago, though. So even, I'm curious to re-listen to it. 8 months is quite a long time.
She'll close it out for us, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Christopher Picard, as stated, your DOC number is 334954. You're here seeking a commutation of your sentence. You were sentenced in January 1994 in St. Tammany Parish to life for a second-degree murder conviction. Is that
Yes,
information
Yes,
correct?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Freeman?
Okay, Mr. Picard, how old are you?
I am 50, sir.
Okay, and what's your education?
I obtained my GED in 1997.
You saying that while you were in prison?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I'm looking at this card. I've read the reports. I want to hear from you what actually happened that night. What happened with you and the victim and your friend?
Okay, on the day of December 27th, 1991, I was in the company of Harold Brand, and at some point that evening, I don't remember exactly what time, him and I started drinking. And throughout the course of the evening and into the night, I believe we may have went to a bar or two and drank some more. And at some point, we returned to the house I was living in Slidell, and which we brought alcohol there with us as well. And at some point, Miss Shirley Laris joined us. And I guess she was dating Mr. Brand or whatever. I had just got back. I was living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for like the last 4 months. And I just came back for Christmas. And so I asked Harold, did he think Shirley would be open to having sex with both of us? And he said he didn't know. So I was like, well, what are you just gonna ask her? And he was like, look, he was about to go into the bedroom with Shirley. He said, just give me a few minutes and just come in there. So Mr. Brand went into the bedroom, and I did that. I gave him several minutes. I don't know exactly how long. And I opened the bedroom door. Well, Miss Laris didn't respond in a way in which I thought she would be open to what I suggested to Mr. Brand. So I closed the bedroom door. A couple minutes after that, Miss Laris came out and she was visibly upset. She didn't say anything to me. She just walked out the door. Well, not long after that, Harold Brand came out as well, and he was upset too. And he made a statement. He said, well, if I had a gun, I'd kill her. Well, I said, you don't need a gun. And we happened to be standing in the kitchen area of my house. So I opened a drawer and gave him a knife. I said, there you go, you don't need a gun. So he took the knife, we went outside, and Miss Laris was sitting in her car in the driveway. And she still seemed upset. So Mr. Brand tried to open the driver's side door and it was locked. So he then said, she's lucky I can't get in that car. So I said, well, I can get in the car. And I picked a stepping stone up, and I was very intoxicated, but I remember that I didn't want to throw the stone through the driver's side window because I didn't want it to hit Shirley. So I threw it through the back window, the back driver's side window. And by the time I turned around, Harold had reached in through the window, unlocked the door, had opened the door, and was stabbing Miss Laris. And at that point, I feel like I kind of went in shock a little bit. I actually couldn't believe what was happening. And I know that my actions leading up to that point may seem like that don't make sense, but it's true. So I don't know how many times he actually stabbed Miss Laris. But at that point, he pulled her out of the car onto the ground and began striking Miss Laris with the stepping stone. So he then grabbed the stone and thrust it toward me. And he was like, what are you gonna do? And, I was feeling some type of way at that point. So I more or less dropped the stone and intentionally missed her the first time. So he picked the stone up again and thrust it back at me and said, you didn't even hit her. So the second time I dropped the stone, I did hit her. And at that point, we put Miss Laris in the car, we left the scene, and were eventually apprehended shortly thereafter on our way to Mr. Brand's father's residence.
How old were you when you started drinking?
I guess probably early teens, sir.
And have you ever received any treatment for your drinking?
I have in prison. Yes.
What kind have you received in prison?
I've taken substance abuse, living in balance 1 and 2. I have taken AA 12 steps. I'm currently in the Celebrate Recovery program as well.
What would be your sobriety plan if we would
I thought it would be helpful to remind us of the dates. So the first hearing that we saw took place on November 29th, 2021. And this one, we actually fast forward to January 9th, 2023. So it's a good 2 years later. Just wanted to add that context. Let's go back in.
consider releasing you? I mean, do you consider yourself alcoholic?
I'll always be an alcoholic, sir. My plan, if I'm given the chance at release, is to go to the parole project, in which I've been told by my attorney that parole project will offer me an avenue to attend AA meetings. And from there, if given the opportunity, I plan to eventually transition to Alabama, where my family lives. And my attorney has done research in the area where they live, in Alexander City. And she found a place where they have meetings. It's about an hour away from my mother's home. Now, I told my attorney that I would be willing, more than willing, to drive that hour and back, if that's what it took. Well, she actually asked me if I would be willing to start my own AA program, as years ago, I was once the vice president of Alcoholics Anonymous here in the prison. And I recently graduated a class called Moral Compass. It's a social mentor certification training course. So, Mr. Freeman, if given the chance, if that were the case, I would love to do something like that one day.
You know, your victim was only 17, and it's definitely a horrific crime.
Yes, sir.
Worst I've seen on here. What do you think you did to her family and to others involved?
I know from taking the victims awareness class, I can never know exactly what I put her family through, but I have learned that victims of violent crime suffer tremendously, like they PTSD. You know, I've affected them psychologically, emotionally, physically, financially, even spiritually. You know, and I've asked myself over the years, you know, how would I feel if that were my mother or my sister or my child?
Deep breath.
So I can only imagine what they've been through. I know I've done them great harm.
Do you have any children?
Yes, sir. I have one son.
Do you have contact with your son?
I do not. I've tried to reach out to his mother over the years, to try to reconcile with them, as I know he was a victim in this crime as well. You know, and it's been really hard. I was asked in my victim awareness class to write a letter to my son. And that was really hard for me as well. You know, him not being in my life for all these years. And so I was really writing a letter to a little boy who is now grown, you know, and there's nothing more I would like him to be a part of his life.
And what is your job at the prison?
My job, I work at in which we supply canteen items to the different camps here at Angola, as well as different institutions throughout the state.
And how long have you been in that job?
March of this year will be 15 years.
15 years in the same job.
Yes.
I've seen you've gotten a lot of accommodations from prison enterprises. You must be pretty good at what you do. I've seen you taking a ton of classes. Name 1 or 2 classes that you got the most out of.
Well, like I said, my substance abuse and AA programs, obviously, the nature of my crime and my drug and alcohol problems, then the programs greatly impacted me and changed my life, as well as the victims awareness class, as I just touched on. You know, it shined a light on a lot of things for me and gave me an even stronger sense of empathy.
I see you're low risk, you're a minimum custody. You've had 17 disciplinary write-ups. You've done great since 2010 until 2018, when you received a 38. Who did you get that write-up for?
That was for a 3-way phone call, Mr. Freeman. I was interviewed to go to the state police barracks in Zachary. And I felt like the interview went pretty well. So a really good friend of mine, Miss Amy Dozier, in fact, who will be speaking on my behalf today, her boyfriend is actually my best friend here in the prison. And we all visit together. We have visited together for years. So me thinking that I was going to be transferred to another institution, I called Miss Dozier to let her know. Well, coincidentally, she happened to be on the phone with my best friend. So she just, as I'm telling her what I have to tell her, she just clicked over, you know, and made it a conference call.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Have you done any charity work since you've been at the prison? Any extra stuff, any tutoring, anything of that nature?
I have facilitated the 12-step class. I have been a public speaking instructor. I have built over 5,000 toys for underprivileged children. I have volunteered my time to go on outside work details for prison enterprise. I have, for a few years now, during Christmas time, we make Christmas bags for offenders throughout the state. I've also donated canteen items to security at Camp F where I live, as they hold bingo games and such for the elderly prisoners in the camp. I've also helped organize and participated in softball games between security and offenders. I've also recently updated my CPR class certification as well as, sir? Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you said something. I updated my CPR certification. A good friend of mine recently had a heart attack, and I was unable to help him because I didn't know what to do. It had been so long since my previous CPR certification that I had no idea what to do, and I felt helpless. So I felt compelled to go learn basic CPR again in the event that not just him, but anybody else, you know, may need help.
Okay. Last question is, Why should I take a chance on him? Tell me, Mr. Picard, why should me sitting here today, with the heinous nature of this crime, take a chance on you today?
Well, sir, I am ready to take everything that I have learned in this prison, all of these positive character traits that I have gained over the years, everything that has made me an upstanding member of my community here in the prison, I know I can take out there with me into society and become an upstanding member of my community there as well.
Warden, do you have any comments to make?
Yes, sir. Christopher he came to us, as you stated already, in '94. Made his Class A trustee in 2006, working main prison maintenance, doing other things, working the mule barn. And like you said, the last 15 years, he's been working in the CDC warehouse. One thing about the CDC warehouse is that it is canteen items. It's a lot of temptation to grab things, to lose that job. He's worked 15 years there without any issue. So it speaks to his character as far as the job that he's been holding and the work that he's done here.
Thank you, Warden. I have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Rushing.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Ricard,
Yes, sir.
good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And this is the day for honesty.
Yes, sir.
I'm reading a portion of the police report.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to read or paraphrase the statement. And I'm going to want you to respond to that statement, okay?
Yes, sir.
According to your co-defendant, Mr. Ricard suggested that we kill Miss Larris. By that time, Miss Larris had gone to the car. Mr. Brand stated that Picard threw a brick through the window, the car window. Then we dragged her out and stabbed her. I stabbed her first, then the knife broke. It broke off in her, and then we went inside and we got another knife, and then he stabbed her. Is that accurate?
No, sir. I did not stab Miss Larris, and she was not drugged out of the car and stabbed. She was stabbed while she was inside the car.
Okay. I'm just reading the statement.
Okay.
And I just verify the statement and get your comments on it. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Rushing. All right, we'll hear from those who want to speak in support. First, could we hear from Joseph Landon?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
How you doing? My name is Joseph Landix. I am a formerly incarcerated person. I served 25 years as a juvenile offender. I have known Mr. Picard for approximately 15, almost 18 years. Mr. Picard and I developed a great bond while housed in the main prison. Mr. Freeman, you spoke of Mr. Picard's charity. What Mr. Picard did not inform you of is I am a product of his charity. Mr. Picard, with his assistance, helped me to attain my GED within 17 days. The acquisition of my GED would put me on a path that would now position me to speak before you in society. Mr. Picard is one of the most thoughtful, considerate human beings that I have come to know on the face of earth. Yes, this crime is horrible. There's no dispute about it. However, I pray that this board look into Mr. Picard and look into the rehabilitative efforts he has put forth. Mr. Picard, on numerous occasions, has put others before him. Case in point, I arrived at CDC warehouse in 13. I worked there for 8 years before I was ultimately released from prison. At the behest of Mr. Picard, I was selected to work at CDC warehouse. The job is not a job where any offender can go in there, because the offenders who are assigned to CDC warehouse are individually responsible for over $250,000 worth of merchandise for the aisle that they are assigned to. I know because I worked there. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, 4 offenders from CDC were selected to participate in the national emergency COVID crisis. Unbeknownst to me, I was selected, but I ended up discovering through prison enterprise employees that my selection was more of a default than the actual selection. Mr. Picard was selected. Mr. Picard declined and instead recommended me. When I asked Mr. Picard at the conclusion of the pandemic, when we returned to Camp F after living on our job site for a year and 10 days, I asked Mr. Picard, why did he do that? Mr. Picard said, many people don't want to acknowledge it, but you're a far better worker than a lot of us in the warehouse. You was fit for this. And might I add, at the height of COVID, Mr. Picard himself contracted COVID-19. He dealt with excruciating pain in his recovery from COVID-19. That alone shows the compassion and the unselfishness of Chris Picard to select another offender as opposed to himself to go live on another job site outside of prison with no supervision. With all due respect, Mr. Picard was a social mentor way before he took the Moral Compass mentorship class. He mentored me and several others. A lot of us who have regained our freedom, Mr. Picard was a constructive contributor to our release.
All right, good. Mr. Landis, can you wrap it up for us?
With that being said, I pray that this board take into consideration the accomplishments of Mr. Picard and deem him a worthy candidate for a favorable recommendation. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, I'd like to hear from Ms. Catherine Picard.
Hello, good morning. I just wanted to say that both me and my mom have always supported my brother throughout the years, and we both know that if he were given the opportunity to come home, it would just strengthen that support for him. Being there for him throughout the years has helped him a lot, I know, but it also has helped us make it through. It's been very hard. I'm sorry, I don't want to get emotional. But my mom is aging gracefully, I might say. But she has been very unable to make the trip to see him as much as she has always been there for him. And it's really taken a toll on her as well as us. But we are both very confident that if he were given the opportunity to come home, that he would be not only successful, but excel incredibly in society. And we would both do everything in our power to help him with his transition and whatever else he may need from us. We have just seen him progress so well in there. And I agree with the first guy that spoke. I mean, he's just looked up to by so many other inmates. We've seen it several times. He has just so many friends in there. He's just one of the most kindest people that I know.
Ma'am, thank you so much. We appreciate the family's input. Thank you. Amy Dozier?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
You can.
Okay. I'm here today to express my support for Chris. I've known Chris since October of 2015. I know from my friendship with Chris that he has acknowledged his mistakes and he is extremely remorseful for his participation in the crime that was committed. I also believe that he has taken the steps needed for rehabilitation. Chris has been incarcerated for over 30 years. He's taken the time to complete educational programming and other programming to be able to come before you today. He's been a model inmate. He's exhibited very good behavior, as well as a friend and role model to his peers. During the time that I've known Chris, I've had many opportunities to visit with him and correspond with him. I've watched him at many of the rodeos selling his hobby craft and interacting with the public. He has conducted himself with professionalism, respect, and kindness. I truly believe that should he be given the opportunity, he will excel in anything he chooses to do. I will personally be here for Chris should that time come that he is released, if he needs anything at all. My home is open to him, and I will maintain consistent contact with him. He also has the support of many other extended family and friends. I'd also like to mention that Chris had just turned 19 years old when this crime happened. And while I didn't know him at the time, I don't believe that he is that same teenager. He's now a 50-year-old man. He's been incarcerated over 3 decades. Studies show that recidivism decreases with age. And I believe with all of the support that Chris has, he is a great candidate for commutation. As I've said, he has my support, he has my help, 100%. I hope you find it in your hearts today to commute his sentence and give him that opportunity.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. All right. I think that's our allotment for those speaking in support. For the record, the Parole Project is here and has committed to Mr. John Picard as a client. Is that right, Mr. Myers?
Yes, Mr. Nasser, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. We'll hear from the opposition now. Can we hear from Shirley Adams, please? Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Shirley Adams. I'm the victim's mother, Shirley Lowers. They killed her and murdered her on December the 28th, 1991. I will never forget them days. I don't believe Christopher is ready to come out and face the world. I believe if he comes out, he's going to do the same thing. If he's doing so well in prison, keep him there. Let him see what it is. He hurt my family. He hurt me. He's put us through too much, and I can't see him getting out. So I'm asking you to please keep him in there where he belongs for the rest of his life. They stabbed her. They crushed her skull in. They took her out of her window of her car and then put on her jacket because he was cold. I can't believe that he's going to come out and be a saint. That is not going to happen. So please take it in consideration and keep him where he belongs. Thank you.
Ma'am, thank you, Ms. Adams. We appreciate your input. Rachel,
I didn't want to cry.
Hi, my name is Rachel Pickering. This is the first time I'm ever seeing you, Christopher. And Shirley, who you're referring to as Shirley Lowers, that was my best friend. So I've known her since she was a small child. And I have a history with her, a history before you helped take her life, and a history with remembering her.
all right,
And
Ms. Rachel,
Yes.
I hate to interrupt. Would you direct your remarks to us, not to
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So what I'm hearing today, and which I've heard before, is all the great accomplishments and all the great things that have been done. She never got that chance. She never had the opportunity to have any achievements that we're all speaking about today. And I know that her death has hurt everyone. I know that. I know it's hurt the family of Christopher and Harold as well, and I realize that. And I feel for you. I feel for you. But what do you think? You know, I'm just asking today, releasing is like her life didn't matter. It's like it never mattered. And sure, 30 years, 31 years almost has passed by at this point. But it doesn't change the fact that she deserved the right to live. And when it was taken from her, it was taken from us all. We'll never know. We're talking about children being born and achievements. She didn't get that chance. She's never going to get that chance. We're talking about not being able to see a mom today. Her mother never gets to see her. And I visit her at a cemetery, a picture. That's what's left. And the only thing is, yes, Miss Shirley is getting older, but I am going to continue. I'm going to continue to oppose this for as long as I have breath in me, because I don't believe that time erases murdering someone. So I strongly oppose his release. Strongly. Thank you.
Thank you. And from the DA's office, Mr. Clark.
Good afternoon. The state is submitting its opposition in this case based on the heinous and very brutal nature of the murder, in this case, murder of a 17-year-old victim. Just to go on with Mr. Roche had said earlier regarding the stabbing, what we understand from the reports, crime scene reports, and police reports, is that 2 knives were actually used in this particular murder, that a knife was broken off in the victim, because we have the shards that were matched to a knife, and that a second knife was then found on the scene. This would tend to lend more credibility to Mr. Brand's statement as to the culpability of Mr. Picard in this case. Secondly, as far as Mr. Picard's statement about throwing the, I believe it's a concrete paver through the back window, we have his previous statement as well as the crime scene evidence showing that it was the front driver's side window and not the back driver's side window that was shattered out in this case. I think that the minimization of his role in this heinous murder does not lend to someone who has accepted responsibility for this crime and for this offense, and does not show proper rehabilitation in this particular matter. For that reason, and also the reasons expressed by the family of the victims, the state would oppose.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Clark. All right, then, that's everybody. Mr. Picard, before I turn it over to your attorney, Ms. Cameron, is there a statement you'd like to make?
I just want to thank the board for giving me the opportunity. And I pray that you find it in your hearts to give me a favorable recommendation.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Cameron?
Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I appreciate y'all letting me speak today. First, I'd like to start by saying that if there are any mistakes in Chris's packet, those are my own. Please do not hold those against Chris. Chris is not only a client for me, he is a friend. I've known him for 8 years. The most telling fact about who Chris is to me is the fact that my husband introduced me to him very early on. Chad does not do that unless he believes in the character of someone. What I'd like to say today is Chris has been incarcerated for 31 years for this crime. He takes full responsibility for his participation in it and what the decisions, the bad decisions that he made that night. He can't take that back. There is no time that he could do that could make up for the taking of a life. He knows that. He's been very honest about that fact for as long as I've known him. And like I said, he can't change what happened. What he could change is what he did change, himself and who he was. He was a 19-year-old substance abuser and alcoholic. They were very extremely high that night. Chris, actually, some of the details of what happened are vague because of the substances that he was on. But when he decided to change his life, he did. He has taken all of the possibility, all of the programs that are offered here to improve who he is. He's not only taken them, they changed his life so much that he began teaching them and facilitating them. He has taught both of the 12-step programs here. He's also taught public speaking. As far as his residence plan and his sobriety plan, I did want to address that real quickly. Because the AA meeting that we found initially that is in the packet, that is like 5 or 6 minutes from Chris's mother's house in Alexander City, we have since determined that that may have shut down, which is why I have discussed with Chris about the possibility of being a future facilitator again in that area to facilitate other people who have substance abuse issues having the access to those programs. He is planning to be released through Parole Project, as you know. We have also looked into a program much like Parole Project. It's called Shepherd's Promise, which is actually located in Birmingham, Alabama, where that closest AA meeting that Chris was speaking about earlier is located. The reason we have done that is because we are acutely aware that this board may not be appreciative of the AA meeting being an hour away and Chris's inability to possibly get there. So if this board so chooses, when we get to the point where Chris would earn parole, he is willing to be released to Shepherd's Promise as well, if y'all feel like his mother's house is too far away from those types of services. Chris lost even his own family. His child has been adopted by someone else. His ex-wife came to him after he was incarcerated. And so he feels very acutely what the loss of a child feels like, although it is in a different manner. He does acknowledge that difference. Chris has done everything he could possibly do within the penitentiary to make amends for those decisions that he made 31 years ago. And he's spoken on his community service. And we just ask this board to please judge him on who he is today, not that 19-year-old substance abuser and alcoholic 31 years ago. That is what this board is commissioned to do, is to judge who he is today and whether or not he can be a productive citizen. Much like Amy, who is also a friend of mine, I echo her sentiments. Chris will always have me as a support personally, and he will always have our law firm as well, as we intend to be a part of Chris's long-term life and integration into society. So we just humbly ask the board today to judge Chris on his accomplishments and who he is, and not that child who was making bad decisions 31 years ago. Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Freeman?
This is a very, very tough one. You can see from both sides, I mean, the effects that this crime has had. It was a horrific crime. Mr. Picard was 18, getting ready to be 19 when it happened. And like his attorney said, we got to look at what we have today, the man that's in front of us today. And in my mind, I think the man has changed from who he was. I think prison has done all it can do for him. I don't think, no amount of time can justify what happened. But as I said, I think prison's done everything it can for him. And my vote today is to grant and commute to 99 years with immediate parole eligibility.
Mrs. Jackson? Mr. Picard, this is hard. This was a terrible, terrible crime. And I think about how that young lady must have suffered, how afraid she was, terrible thing that happened. And I feel for her, feel for her family. And so this is hard.
Yes, ma'am.
But if our job is to judge not just on the crime, if that were the only thing, this would be an easy decision. But it's not. It's to look at who you are, what you've accomplished. And I think the thing that really spoke to me most is just the remark, Brandon. Someone whose life is positively impacted by your influence. You're putting him ahead of your own interests. I think speaks a lot about person. I also have to take into consideration your age at the time that this offense occurred. And while it was horrific, I can't even imagine what entered into your thought processes. But I know an 18-year-old and 50-year-old are vastly different in the way they think and process the world around them. And so my vote today, likewise, would be to recommend commutation for 99 years. Mr. Rushing?
Mr. Picard.
Yes, sir.
I agree with most of the things that my colleague said today. I agree with your attorney that this board is commissioned to look at the person you are today. We also have a responsibility, and it's stated in the vision of this board that we must keep the victim as a part of this process.
Yes, sir.
The mother of the victim has appeared today. She is still emotionally, mentally, and physically affected by the death of her daughter. The district attorney has made a statement that the statement I read is most likely true. The knife did break off into the victim, and there was a second knife at the scene of the crime. I don't think you are fully truthful with us today. And because of adamant opposition of the victim's family, strong opposition from the DA, in which this was tried in a premeditated, and it was premeditated. You had a choice, and you took a life based on all that information that I have to deny your request today.
Thank you, Mr. Rushay. Mr. Mirabel.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There is just no question that this was a horrible crime. And if my vote to deny you today would bring back that young woman, I would do it in a second. We don't have that power. We don't have that authority. Our responsibility is to look at the facts and to hear the video, not hear the pain, not hear the grief that the mother is in. It's no question. But as I look at what you've accomplished and who you are today, as Judge Jackson has pointed out, you were 18 years old at the time. You're a 50-year-old man. Done a lot of very positive things while you've been in prison. I agree. Mr. Landis' testimony was very powerful. My vote likewise would be to recommend to the governor the commuter sentence to 99 years.
All right, Mr. Picard. This is terrible. I reviewed the case. I just put terrible crime. I was really struck by the violent nature of the crime. And talking to you today and hearing what the warden had to say about you, looking at your prison record, I do concur with my colleagues. My vote today will be to vote to commute your sentence to 99 years with parole eligibility, and that is the recommendation of my committee.
Thank you.
Good luck
Thank
to
you.
you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, all board members.
Gordon Falvey, that concludes our business at your facility. We'll recess. It's 12:49. Thanks for accommodating us today.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Have we all gone mad? Is it just me that's like really pissed off right now? I'm sorry, Rachel. What I'm pissed off about, Mr. Roche says it best. I know he can sometimes frustrate us, but man, he can at least be on point. The dude lied. I mean, when he started off with this whole story, I thought that Mr. Marabella was going to tear into him, but it was like, whatever, what kind of programs are you doing? And I'm like, what? Programs? This guy just made up this totally absurd story, and you're talking about programs? By the way, anyone, if you're wondering who his attorney is, who is holding his victim's hand in a really creepy way, we have a case. I'll drop the link down below. When she mentions Chad, my husband, introduced me to him. We have a case with Chad, her husband. He also stabbed a man to death, by the way. So I love that she's referring to her convicted murder felon husband as a great reference for this man. That's really something I can use as a great reference for why Christopher is a great guy, because he doesn't normally introduce me to great guys, you know. Just saying. Yeah, you can't make it up. You can't make it up. I'd be okay with it if he was honest. I think I would be. I know many of you are watching. No way, you bury under the prison. But the bottom line is our system is meant to rehabilitate. It is meant to punish. And if it does both, then people, I think, should have a right to gain freedom. But in this case, he was just lying and dragging and really it starts with, well, I was in the house and I wanted to have a threesome and I asked my buddy. And then, I don't know, they looked upset. So then she went in the car and I threw a rock through the window, but in the back because I didn't want to hurt her. And then my buddy dragged her out and then stabbed her and then dropped a brick on her head. Then gave me the brick and said I had to drop it. And I intentionally missed, but then I dropped it on her head. And it's like, what? It was so obviously a lie. The whole thing was so ridiculous. How do you reward someone like this with freedom? You can't. But they just did. I don't get it. Everything goes out the window when you come up here and you can't own up to it. I don't get it. I don't. I don't know, like, why Carrie Myers would want to support someone like, you know, who maybe Carrie Myers didn't know that he would have just come up here and make up this whole random story. We know from the evidence that that's not how it happened. He just got in front of the board and lied. No, he threw a rock. Can you imagine the terror of being 17-year-old girl and having your car, she's probably trying to drive away. They smash through her window, drag her out, stab her. The knife breaks, they go and get another one. And then they crush her skull in. It's out of horror movie. It's out of your worst nightmares. And then he gets up here and lies about it. And everyone but Mr. Roche and the prosecutor and the victims, they take it hook, line, and sinker. I don't know. Who cares that he's been honest for all these years? And who cares that there's a story where he recommended someone else? I'm sure there was a reason behind it. Stuff like this pisses me off. Not as bad as the cockroaches piss me off, but it's more about the injustice that I see here. If you can't admit what you've done and own up to it, not to mention the whole thing, he doesn't have a relationship with his son. And I don't know if those stairs are real either. A lot of red flags for me. A lot of red flags. That prosecutor, Brian Clark, we saw one situation where the board and him really bumped heads. I think Miss Jackson insulted him about his appreciation of Vietnam War veterans. He gets pretty upset in that one. I can drop the link for that too. Shaking my head. Sometimes you feel like you're living in an alternate universe. That's what I feel like right now. Admit it. I'd be okay with it. You can't admit it. You're gonna make up a story. Tell me I'm crazy, people. Community. Man, do community. Tell me what you think. Tell me if I'm losing it. Love to hear your comments down below, and do the algorithm.
Mr. Brand, is there a statement you'd like to make before we turn it over to Ms. Palmentier?
Yes, ma'am. I know
And address your remarks to us, the board,
Yes,
okay?
ma'am. I know there's nothing I can do to atone for my actions 30 years ago. I'm not the 19-year-old who committed that horrible crime. I've taken advantage of every opportunity that's been offered and given to me to become a better person. I'm truly sorry for what happened. I'm ashamed of it. I'm sickened by it. If I could undo it, I would. But every choice I made for the last 25 years has become a better person to help others. And if I'm given an opportunity to receive a second chance, I'm going to continue doing that once I'm released. Thank you.
Sir. Ms. Palmentier?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I have met with Bubba now multiple times at the State Police Barracks, where he's been housed for the last dozen years. I've reviewed the record from his court proceedings, including his tape confession, which he gave some 45 minutes after being arrested. And Judge Jackson, I would like to address a couple of the issues that you had brought to our attention as far as any mental health treatment that Mr. Brand has received. I do know from reviewing the record that at one point a sanity commission was appointed, and there was 3 doctors that were gave their reports for Mr. Brand, and he was determined competent to proceed. As far as mental health, other than the programs that he's taken, I do know of that. As far as his remark during his confession, 45 minutes after he was arrested, of him being a knucklehead, I know that Mr. Brand would describe himself and his actions that night as having been those of a monster. I've talked with him. I know how he feels about it. And I know that he is not a monster, and that he was acting out of drugs and alcohol. And I know that he prays for the Laris family. He prays that they will find forgiveness in their hearts. And there's nothing that he can do to change the fact or whether they're opposed to his parole eligibility. He can't change that. But what he can change, and no number of certificates, degrees, or amount of time that he actively reformed his life will ever take away or diminish the loss suffered by her family. And I know he's truly sorry. I know it. And based on what he has accomplished in the last 30 years, he's not the same person that's in that statement he gave on December 28th of 1991 when he was 19 years old and killed Shirley. The record reflects that he's actively committed himself to this transformation by completing every program available to him and mentoring and serving others in those same programs. Bubba's case is not one that the board sees all the time, where someone applies for commutation and then suddenly finds Jesus. This is a very unusual case where the board has a complete record that shows a consistent pattern over the last 30 years of a life transformed. His youth and horrible choices during the first 20 years of his life culminated in the tragic death in this case. We hope the board will consider his last 30 years of more than atonement, but genuine remorse as expressed through his actions and commitment to change. We're respectfully asking this honorable board to grant his request for clemency and commute his life sentence to a determinate number of years with immediate parole eligibility. Thank you.
I'm glad I rewatched that, because I didn't even realize how bad I think of the job she did. We're going to start with the attorney, because she said he was acting on drugs and alcohol. He prays that they, as in the victims, will find forgiveness in their hearts. What attorney says that at the final statement? It always pisses me off when they have the audacity. You can see the mother's unable to even get 3 words in edgewise before she, with all of she's the attorney's going to say that he prays for that the mother will find forgiveness for him. If anything, it would be, I pray that the mother can one day have less pain. I was going to say peace, but that's not even, really, you just say nothing, because there's nothing you can say. And then she says, I know he's truly sorry. I know it. You're an attorney. Speak some facts, not feelings and gibberish. She says, he's not the same person. And then she goes on to talk about, again, the knucklehead thing. How when he said that he was a knucklehead in the police station, that's when he was, but she doesn't even have the facts of the case right. She doesn't even know the facts. He didn't say that he was a knucklehead in the police station. He said he was a knucklehead when applying for the commutation. This would have been several months ago, maybe a year ago. Let's go look back.
I'm a different.
Let me ask you something else, because I understand we aren't the same at 19 as we are at whatever age you are now. But as part of your application process, you referred to yourself back then as a 19-year-old knucklehead. Remember that?
Yes, ma'am. I was just stupid.
I struggle with applying the term knucklehead to someone who commits a vicious, horrific murder. A knucklehead is someone who attempts to avoid a DWI checkpoint and runs off the road and gets in an accident. That's a knucklehead. But to describe someone who viciously murders someone that they know as a knucklehead makes me question the depth of your remorse and your understanding of the magnitude of what happened in this case. So what would you say about that?
I meant that I was irresponsible, that I was selfish, that I was inconsiderate, I had no regard for others. There's no words that describe the remorse that's within my heart. I know the hurt that I caused. I know the life that was.
So as you can see, the attorney, even in her final statements, thinks that he described himself as a knucklehead in the sheriff's office after getting arrested. No, he said in the sheriff's office that he just wanted to know what it was like to kill someone. And only in applying for the application for commutation did he say he was a knucklehead. He is missing. He does seem to be missing any awareness and self-conscious. Like his final speech was, "There's nothing I can do to take it back," which is, I find it to be just so fascinating that is one thing in common that these monsters say. Nothing I could do to take it back. And also, I'm sorry for what happened, or I'm sorry that it happened. Not I'm sorry that I did it. They all do that. And then they all go on to say, if I could take it back, I would. It's the strangest thing. They all do it. They all do it. It's so bizarre. Okay, let's go to his.
Everybody, Mr. Picard, before I turn it over to your attorney, Ms. Cameron, is there a statement you'd like to make?
I just want to thank the board for giving me the opportunity. And I pray that you find it in your hearts to give me a favorable recommendation.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Cameron?
Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I appreciate y'all letting me speak today. First, I'd like to start by saying that if there are any mistakes in Chris's packet, those are my own. Please do not hold those against Chris. Chris is not only a client for me, he is a friend. I've known him for 8 years. The most telling fact about who Chris is to me is the fact that my husband introduced me to him very early on. Chad does not do that unless he believes in the character of someone. What I'd like to say today is Chris has been incarcerated for 31 years for this crime. He takes full responsibility for his participation in it and what the bad decisions that he made that night. He can't take that back. There is no time that he could do that could make up for the taking of a life. He knows that. He's been very honest about that fact for as long as I've known him. And like I said, he can't change what happened. What he could change is what he did change, himself and who he was. He was a 19-year-old substance abuser and alcoholic. They were very extremely high that night. Chris, actually, some of the details of what happened are vague because of the substances that he was on. But when he decided to change his life, he did. He has taken all of the possibility, all the programs that are offered here to improve who he is. He's not only taken them, they changed his life so much that he began teaching them. and facilitating them. He has taught both of the 12-step programs here. He's also taught public speaking. As far as his residence plan and his sobriety plan, I did want to address that real quickly, because the AA meeting that we found initially that is in the packet, that is like 5 or 6 minutes from Chris's mother's house in Alexander City, we have since determined that that may have shut down, which is why I have discussed with Chris about the possibility of being a future facilitator again in that area to facilitate other people who have substance abuse issues having the access to those programs. He is planning to be released through Parole Project, as you know. We have also looked into a program much like Parole Project. It's called Shepherd's Promise, which is actually located in Birmingham, Alabama, where that closest AA meeting that Chris was speaking about earlier is located. The reason we have done that is because we are acutely aware that this board may not be appreciative of the AA meeting being an hour away and Chris's inability to possibly get there. So if this board so chooses, when we get to the point where Chris would earn parole, he is willing to be released to Shepherd's Promise as well, if y'all feel like his mother's house is too far away from those types of services. Chris lost even his own family. His child has been adopted by someone else. His ex-wife came to him after he was incarcerated. And so he feels very acutely what the loss of a child feels like, although it is in a different manner. He does acknowledge that difference. Chris has done everything he could possibly do within the penitentiary to make amends for those decisions that he made 31 years ago. And he's spoken on his community service. And we just ask this board to please judge him on who he is today, not that 19-year-old substance abuser and alcoholic 31 years ago. That is what this board is commissioned to do, is to judge who he is today and whether or not he can be a productive citizen. Much like Amy, who is also a friend of mine, I echo her sentiments. Chris will always have me as a support personally, and he will always have our law firm as well, as we intend to be a part of Chris's long-term life and integration into society. So we just humbly ask the board today to judge Chris on his accomplishments and who he is, and not that child who was making bad decisions 31 years ago. Thank you.
And not that child who was making bad decisions. That was pretty bad too. Frankly, both attorneys, I don't get it. I'm not for just dumping on attorney, right? Like I'm there. I think I say it how I see it, and I mean, it's just the certain things she said. He takes full responsibility. Well, no, you didn't. You lied. You lied in the hearing. The DA pointed that out. You did not take full responsibility. Then she goes on to say, he can't take it back. Even the attorneys say it. What is the meaning in using those words? He can't take, I thought he could take it back. Thank you for telling me that he couldn't take it back. It's so weird. It's just, I don't understand it. There's got to be something in law school that when they are teaching these law students to say, by the way, don't ever say or recommend that your client should say, I can't take it back. It's just so empty. And then she says a lot, some gibberish. He's been honest about that. He's been honest about that he can't take it back. Well, what does that even mean? And that he can't change what happened. Who are you telling that to? Then she goes on to add more insult to injury, I think, Chris even lost his own family. She says that he feels very acutely aware that his loss is not the same as their loss, but he's lost his family. His son has been adopted, and then she mentioned something about, and his ex-wife visited. Remember, he was 19. His ex-wife, and he was going there to assault. Oh, what are you even saying? And then she didn't even finish the sentence. It didn't make any sense. She said the ex-wife, but had no finishing words in front of it or end of it. But assume that she meant he lost his wife and his child. And she was saying that in the context that because of that, he understands the pain that the family is going through. But he's acutely aware it's different. What are you saying? You still have your son, first of all. He's not dead. And the ex-wife, that's not even, that's like a fling when you're a teenager. What loss is that? What are you even saying? That's the attorney's statement. Bizarre. Strange, I gotta tell you. His statement was fine. I mean, I like that he just basically said like two things, which, I mean, I think that, what do you say? I hope you find it in your heart to release me, and I thank you for the opportunity. And I'll say, hey, it's better to just say that than to go on some fake cry moment or some thing where he's begging the family for forgiveness. So I can actually give him credit for it, maybe just keeping it short, because I think anything else would have just been an insult. But I could hear why some of you might have said, no, he should have said something profound and genuine. But wow. It's interesting. I didn't intend on keeping my unpacking from 8 months ago. But I listened to it and said, wow, I kind of feel the same way. So I just kept it in there. And now I'm going to unpack with both of those hearings. And man, it's, he's still locked up. He hasn't gotten he's gotten the recommendation to the governor, but the parole hearing, so the approval from the governor hasn't happened yet. So we will see his parole hearing if the governor does commute. Maybe the governor doesn't, but they're packing all these parole hearings into the docket before the end of the year. So we will find out soon, and I'll let you know. But I thought I would first start. We have the assistant DA show up for both hearings. So I want to just hear the assistant DA's statement for the first one, and then we'll go to Clark for the second one, just to compare the two different styles.
Thank you, Mr. Lavelle. Next, we're going to go to Matthew Kaplan, the 22nd JDC as Assistant District Attorney.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to appear by Zoom. I've just some short comments. What I was going to say, Ms. Jackson really hit on the head, which is that, it does not seem like Mr. Brand is experiencing a terrible amount of suffering, given that he's been in a minimum security facility for 12 years, including 6 years at the governor's mansion. But Shirley Laris's parents continue to suffer. Ms. Adams wrote a letter to the parole board indicating that she continues to have nightmares involving Mr. Brand. And so they're experiencing very much suffering. And to allow him to walk out of prison would increase, it would just cause more suffering in the world. That's the bottom line. The other things are, this is a 17-year-old who died because Harold Brand wanted to know what it felt like to kill somebody. And I commend his 0 write-ups in 17 years is very impressive, as well as all the developments he's, the education he has attained, and his ministering to prisoners. It's all very commendable. But all I ask, it's one thing to have to bury your child. It's another thing to have to watch the man who killed your child walk out of prison. And I would ask that if the board is inclined to grant clemency, at least wait until Shirley's parents have passed away. Not that I hope that happens anytime soon, but the only way to do this without dramatically increasing the amount of suffering in the world is to wait until such suffering will not occur. And thank you.
Definitely, I thought a very different kind of ADA statement. It didn't seem like he was particularly prepared. His main fact was that he's not suffering, which he is in the governor's mansion, that his suffering doesn't compare to that of the family, that him getting out would only make the family suffer more. I do agree with those lines, but again, it didn't. And then he goes on to commend him for the no write-ups, to commend him for his ministry work, to commend him and how that's impressive. And then finally, and he does mention that for a second about the idea that he wanted to know what it felt like to end someone's life. But then finishes off with he shouldn't get out until. I thought that is a moving statement. There's one thing to bury your child, but another to have to walk the person who to see the person enter the life walk out of prison. And if you're going to do the commutation, at least wait till they leave the earth. And I can agree with that statement, certainly. Now let's see Brian Clark, who has a very different style.
Thank you. And from the DA's office, Mr. Clark.
Good afternoon. The state is submitting its opposition in this case based on the heinous and very brutal nature of the murder, in this case, murder of a 17-year-old victim. Just to go on with Mr. Roche had said earlier regarding the stabbing, what we understand from the reports, crime scene reports, and police reports, is that 2 knives were actually used in this particular murder, that a knife was broken off in the victim, because we have the shards that were matched to a knife, and that a second knife was then found on the scene. This would tend to lend more credibility to Mr. Brand's statement as to the culpability of Mr. Picard in this case. Secondly, as far as Mr. Picard's statement about throwing the, I believe it's a concrete paver through the back window, we have his previous statement as well as the crime scene evidence showing that it was the front driver's side window and not the back driver's side window that was shattered out in this case. I think that the minimization of his role in this heinous murder, it does not lend to someone who has accepted responsibility for this crime and for this offense, and does not show proper rehabilitation in this particular matter. For that reason, and also the reasons expressed by the family of the victims, the state would oppose.
I happen to prefer Brian Clark's approach. He just lays out the fact that he's just lying. He's not taking accountability, even at his own. As his own commutation hearing, and I'm starting to feel that anger boil up in me again. He's like trying to make himself feel better. I threw the rock through the back of the windshield because I didn't want to hurt her. We only planned this sexual assault of her, and then we only want to drag her out of the car. I only gave him a knife and said, "Hey, you don't need a gun. You have a knife." And it's like, and then he's like, "Hey, what do you say? You didn't hit her with the rock, or you got to do it again." And he's like blaming it. It's just, how, like, picture when we see in the news and hear in the news about stories today, and we get to watch their interrogation, and you see this, they weren't 16 either. They were 19 years old. I mean, and they say in the interrogation, well, I just wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. Could you ever imagine that 32 years later, they'd be getting a commutation to go free? And it's one, you're having your commutation hearing, to own up to the crime. That has to be something that happens. There's something I didn't point out in the other unpacking, and I don't think I fully appreciated it until now, but her friend Rachel, who was her friend so many years ago, to see her show up for both hearings, you can tell. I mean, that is a true friend. She's been holding this pain. She's been, she didn't let it go. She's making it part of her responsibility for her friend that she knew all those years ago. That's very special. And she gets nothing in return for it. That's the sign. That's unlike in this situation where Miss Jackson actually says, well, I saw that you offered your friend the opportunity to work outside of Angola, and that says a lot to me. And again, I said, you know what, we don't know, because maybe he just didn't want to work outside. Maybe he was happy with his job at commissary. Maybe he, it's like, there's no telling that is a selfless act. What Rachel is doing, caring with her for her whole life, is a selfless act, in my opinion. Standing up for her friend who can't speak for herself. It was nice to see that the mother was able to get out her testimony. I know you could tell the last one they cut her off because of the language, and I think it was Miss Renatza that cut her off. That's just also her style. But in this case, she was able to get it out. And you can still hear the pain is just so raw. And every time they have these commutations, they're bringing it up. And to think that they have to go through this and then have the unknowns if he's going to get his sentence commuted or not commuted. And his attorney holding his hand. We've seen that several times. The worst one that we've ever seen was this. It was a young attorney that was more than groping the person's arm, and like really it was an obscene scene. And it wasn't, I always look in the comment section to see if I'm off base and what the consensus is. And it seemed everyone was disgusted by it. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen. An attorney basically groping her client for an hour straight. And he didn't, although I have to say, he didn't look comfortable with her hand on his hand. But it does seem a little bizarre that an attorney would start by saying that the most telling fact of who he is because her husband, Chad, said he's a good guy. Her fellow murderer husband, Chad, who is in Angola with him. It's just beyond me that is something that an attorney with all of the knowledge and insight would say at a commutation hearing. It just doesn't make sense. But I'll put those links to those hearings in the description. I wish there was more court details to go through, but they just took plea deals, and that's why there's not any more. But I think we do have enough clear information about what had happened. It was two friends that wanted to know what it would be like to end someone's life, and they saw it through. And it's like I said, it's like the most terrifying. You can't make a movie more terrifying. Hollywood. It's a Hollywood terror script, and they played it out to the fullest. And one of them was granted a commutation, but he hasn't been given parole yet. So we shall see. And with that, I'll let you go.